The wind that night was not just wind. It carried voices. Some said they were whispers of the mountain, the old spirits that had lived in those woods long before men with rifles and greed came to claim it. Others said it was the sound of rope creaking on a tree limb. Either way, in the cold hollow of Black Elk Valley, nobody slept easy anymore. It was April of 1809 when Abigail Holt, barely 10 years old, watched her world end under a moon that looked far too bright for what it was about to witness. Her father, Samuel Holt, was a poor farmer, stubborn, honest, and proud of the patch of land he'd carved out with his own hands. He was also the last man standing against the barons of Coleridge, a group of wealthy landowners determined to drive every family off those hills to claim the timber and the iron beneath. That night, they came for him. 5 men on horseback. 5 names the valley would never forget. They dragged Samuel from his cabin as his daughter screamed from the doorway. Her mother had died 2 winters before. Fever took her. And now only the child remained to witness what men do when money blinds them. Samuel Holt, one of them said, stepping forward. His name was Elias Crow, leader of the group, a man whose voice was slick with arrogance. You've been warned to vacate this land. You've refused. The deed's null. The time for mercy's done. Her father spat blood onto the dirt. You can't own what the Lord gave to all of us. Crow's eyes darkened. Then may the Lord take you now. The next sound was rope scraping against bark. The hanging tree, a twisted, ancient oak that stood just beyond the creek, had been used before. For thieves. For deserters. For those the powerful wanted erased. But that night, it claimed an innocent man. Abigail screamed until her throat broke, until her nails bled from clawing at the men's boots. They laughed. They rode away, leaving her alone beneath the swinging body of her father, his eyes still open, staring down at her through the branches. And in that moment, something inside her shattered, and something new was born. A silence colder than death. A promise sharper than any blade. If you're watching this story right now, take a deep breath. Imagine being 10 years old, alone in the woods, your father's body hanging before you, and no one left to turn to. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Because what happens next will haunt you long after this story ends. And if you're still here, make sure to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. The girl buried her father herself. The ground was too hard, so she dug with her hands. It took all night. When the sun rose, her fingers were blistered raw, but she laid him down near the roots of that same cursed tree. Then she sat beside it for hours, maybe days, until the hunger pains became normal, until the grief turned into something else. Resolve. She swore she'd never cry again. She swore she'd learn how to make the strong bleed. And she swore she'd come back for every single one of them. The years passed. The girl became a ghost in the valley, living off the land, trapping, hunting, surviving. The settlers who came and went spoke of the orphan of Black Elk, a wild-eyed girl seen roaming near the mountains at dusk. By 16, Abigail Holt no longer looked like a child. Her eyes had grown darker, not from lack of sleep, but from holding too many memories. One morning, she found a rusted rifle buried behind her father's cabin. The barrel was cracked, but the trigger still worked. She cleaned it, oiled it, and slept with it beside her every night. That rifle became her heartbeat. And then came the whispers, the names that still echoed in her dreams. Elias Crow, Jacob Thorne, Silas Boone, Matthew Crane, Jonas Vexler. 5 men, 5 ropes, 5 initials waiting to be carved into bark. But before she could avenge anything, she needed power. And power meant learning how to kill without being seen. So she watched the trappers, watched how they set snares in silence, watched how they bled a deer with precision, and she practiced every single night until the pull of a trigger became as natural as breathing. The first kill came easier than she expected. It wasn't one of the 5. It was a stranger, a bandit who tried to take her supplies near the river. He laughed at her when she warned him off. said she was just a girl. She shot him once, right through the eye. She simply stared at the blood soaking into the soil, the same soil that had swallowed her father, and whispered, "One down." After that, she knew she was ready. The first snow of winter fell like ash on the mountains. It dusted the ground in silence, masking the prints of those who walked with purpose through the woods. 6 years had passed since the hanging. The cabins of the poor were gone, replaced by fences, mines, and the sound of men splitting the earth for the sake of wealth. And among them, Elias Crow stood tall, the new lord of Coal Ridge. He had built himself a mansion at the edge of town, right where Samuel Holt's cabin once stood. The irony was poison to the girl who now watched from the tree line. Her breath fogged the cold air as she crouched beneath her cloak, eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed. She no longer looked like the little girl he'd once ignored. Now, she looked like a shadow, a shape stitched from grief, hunger, and the patience of the damned. Elias Crow had aged well. His hair, once dark, was streaked with gray, the kind of gray earned from power, not struggle. He had 2 guards, a stable boy, and a wife who spent most of her time staring out windows, pretending not to see what her husband really was. Abigail watched them for 4 weeks, 4 months. She memorized their patterns: when the guard left to drink, when Crow rode out, when the lights went out. And when she finally moved, she moved like a ghost. It was just past midnight when she slipped into the barn. The horses stirred but didn't cry out. They knew her scent somehow, as if the valley itself remembered her. She took a coil of rope from the wall, her hand steady, her heartbeat slow, the same kind of rope they had used on her father. Then she waited, silent, patient, until Elias came stumbling in, half drunk, carrying a lantern. He muttered something under his breath, kicked the mud from his boots, and set the light down. That was when she stepped from the shadows. "Evening, Mr. Crow," she said softly. He spun, startled, eyes wide. "Who's there? Show yourself." The lantern flame danced against her face. He saw the dark eyes first, steady, cold, then the rifle slung at her side. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Crow blinked, squinting through the haze of drink. I don't." "You should," she interrupted. "You came to my father's cabin 6 years ago. Said the deed was null. Said mercy was done." He froze. And then, as realization dawned, his lips trembled. "The girl, the Holt girl, you're still alive." "Alive enough," she said. "And so are you, for now." Crow tried to back away, but the barn door was shut behind him. She raised the rifle, motioned him to stand still. "Take off your belt," she ordered. He hesitated, so she cocked the gun. "Do it." He obeyed. She took the belt and tied his hands behind him, then looped the rope over the same rafter he'd used years before when it was her father swinging. Her movements were calm, almost rehearsed. "Please," he stammered. "It wasn't personal. It was land business." "You don't understand how things work." "I understand," she cut in. "You took what wasn't yours and called it justice. You killed a man who only wanted to feed his child." She kicked a stool beneath him, forced him to stand upon it. He whimpered. "The others made me do it. It wasn't just me." "I know," she said softly. "That's why you're first." Then she tightened the noose around his neck. Crow struggled, breath trembling. "You'll hang for this, girl!" Abigail tilted her head, her voice cold as the wind outside. "No, you will." The stool fell. For a moment, she didn't breathe. The barn filled with the sound of rope creaking, the same sound that had haunted her dreams for years. She watched his body twitch, then go still. The silence afterward was pure, almost peaceful. Then she took out her knife, walked to the hanging tree outside her father's grave, and carved the first letter into its bark, EC. Blood from her hand stained the blade. She didn't wipe it clean. She wanted the valley to know what had begun. Now, if you're still watching this far, let me ask you, what would you have done? If men murdered your father and stole your home, would you forgive? Or would you do exactly what Abigail Holt just did? Tell me in the comments, and while you're here, subscribe. Because the next name on her list, he doesn't die easy. For 2 weeks, no one found Elias Crow. His horse wandered into town alone, reins trailing behind it, as if leading the men to the body. When they found him hanging in his own barn, the town went quiet. Some whispered it was bandits. Others said it was justice. But the old folk, the ones who remembered Samuel Holt, just nodded and said, "The hills remember." Abigail listened to the gossip from the edge of the woods, her hood pulled low. She knew they'd hunt for whoever did it. But she also knew the lawmen here were paid by the same hands that had once held the rope. So she waited again. And when the dust settled, she turned her eyes toward the next name. Jacob Thorne, the banker, a man who profited from every eviction in Coal Ridge. He wasn't as cruel as Crow, but he was just as guilty. He lived in the town's new brick house, rare for that time, and wore imported suits. He liked to brag that he'd tamed the mountain folk. He had no idea one of those mountain folk was watching him through his window every night. Abigail studied his habits. He walked home alone, drank before bed, slept heavy, but this time she wanted him to see her before he died. She wanted him to know who had come to collect. She broke into his home on a rain-soaked night. Lightning cracked across the sky as she stood in his study, the firelight flickering over her face. He turned, startled, clutching a glass of brandy. "What in God's name? God ain't in this room," she said, stepping closer. He recognized her too. They all did, eventually. "The Holt girl," he whispered. "Say his name," she said. He blinked. "Whose name?" "My father's." He swallowed hard. "Samuel Holt." "Good," she said. "Now you can join him." The shot echoed across the valley. She didn't hang this one. Not yet. She wanted variety. Wanted the message to spread. No man who touched that rope would die the same. When they found Thorne's body slumped in his chair, a single bullet between the eyes, there was a message carved into his desk, 2 down. The hills remember. By the time spring thawed the mountain snows, Coal Ridge was no longer a town. It was a rumor wrapped in fear. People spoke of the girl in whispers. The Holt girl. The hanging ghost. Some said she came at night, carrying a rope made from her father's hair. Others swore she could vanish into trees. The truth was simpler and far deadlier. Abigail Holt was still human. She just had nothing left to lose. 2 men down. 3 left. Silas Boone, her next target, was different from the rest. He wasn't rich, but he was cruel, the kind of man who enjoyed pain the way others enjoyed music. Back in 1809, he'd been the one who tied the knot on her father's rope, and he'd smiled while doing it. Now, he was foreman at the iron quarry down by Red Creek. He lived rough among other rough men in a camp that reeked of whiskey, sweat, and arrogance. Getting to him wouldn't be easy, but Abigail had learned patience, and patience was something Silas Boone didn't have. For 2 weeks, she watched the camp from the ridgeline. The men worked by day, gambling by night. She studied their routines until she could move among them unseen, just another shadow in the pines. She waited for the hunter's moon, the night when the mountain glowed silver and every creature prowled. The same moon, she remembered, that had shone down on her father's hanging. She took it as a sign. That night, the campfire crackled with laughter. Silas Boone sat among his men, boasting loud enough for the whole valley to hear. "Crow's dead. Thorne's dead. You ask me, that girl's a ghost," he said, spitting into the fire. "And if she ain't, I'll hang her myself and let the buzzards have the rest." The men laughed, raising their bottles. But in the darkness beyond the circle of light, someone else smiled. Abigail watched them from the shadows, the rifle steady in her hands. The wind carried the smell of pine and smoke. She could have shot him then, one clean pull of the trigger, and it would have been over. But she didn't want easy. She wanted just. She wanted him to feel the same fear her father did, staring up at the rope and knowing it was the last thing he'd ever see. She crept closer, step by step, silent as snowfall. But this time, something went wrong. The horse nearest her caught her scent, whinnied sharp and sudden. "Who's there?" Boone barked, rising to his feet. Abigail froze. The rifle glinted in moonlight, too late to hide it. A shout went up, and in a heartbeat, Half the camp was on their feet. Gunfire split the night. She ran, weaving through trees as bullets tore bark around her. A shot grazed her shoulder. Another shattered the lanterns, plunging the woods into chaos. "Find her!" Boone roared. Dead or alive, Abigail sprinted through the dark, clutching her bleeding arm. She knew the terrain, the hollows, the ravines, better than any of them. But the pain slowed her. The blood left a trail. They followed. She ducked into an abandoned mine shaft, pressing herself against the cold wall, heart pounding. The sound of boots echoed behind her. Boone entered last, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. His voice was low, cruel, almost amused. "I know you're in here, girl," he said. "Come on out now. Make it easy." She stayed silent, watched his light flicker against the rock. Boone stepped further in. "You think you can kill me like the others? I ain't some fancy banker or drunk landowner. I know how to gut a rat." Still no answer. He grinned. "Fine then, I'll find you." He didn't see the wire until it was too late. Abigail had set it at knee height, anchored between two stones. Boone's foot caught. His body lurched forward. The lantern flew, shattering against the wall. Flame bloomed. Smoke filled the shaft. Abigail burst from her hiding place, slamming the butt of her rifle into his face. He fell, roaring in pain. "You," he gasped. "You." She didn't let him finish. She grabbed the rope she'd been carrying, the same kind she used for every one of them, and looped it around his neck. Boone clawed at it, choking. You ain't human." "Neither were you," she whispered. She pulled. Hard. The fire spread quickly. By the time the men outside saw the smoke and rushed in, it was too late. The shaft collapsed in a roar of flame and rock. Silas Boone was buried beneath it, the third man to pay for Samuel Holt's death. When the fire finally died, they found what was left of him half-charred, rope still around his throat. And carved into the rock nearby were two letters, SB. If you're still watching right now, you're in deep with Abigail Holt's story. You've seen what she's done, what she's become. But here's the question: when does vengeance stop being justice? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if you believe the guilty should always pay, hit that subscribe button, because the last two names on her list will change everything. After Boone's death, the law came hard. Posters went up across the counties. Wanted, the hanging girl of Appalachia. They offered gold, horses, freedom, anything for her capture. But the mountains were her shield. She moved between hollows and ridges, sleeping in caves, leaving nothing but whispers behind. The legend grew. Children dared each other to go near the hanging tree at dusk. Some claimed they heard a voice, a girl's whisper saying names that chilled the blood. And in town, one man began to unravel. Matthew Crane, the fourth of the Barons. He had once been a preacher before greed found him. Now, guilt haunted him worse than hellfire. He drank too much. He prayed too little. And every time the wind moaned through the trees, he swore he heard it calling his name. Abigail knew. She had watched him crumble from afar. But this time, she wanted him to face himself before he faced her. So she left signs, a scrap of rope on his doorstep, a single carved initial, EC, in the wood of his church door, then another, JT. Every mark dragged him deeper into madness. By the time she carved SB, he was barely sleeping. He started preaching sermons about sin and fire, about the girl born of the devil's breath. His congregation thinned. His hand shook. He became a man waiting for his own noose. And on the night he finally broke, the moon was full again, just like before. He stood in his empty church, candles burning low, and whispered into the dark, "If you're coming for me, girl, come now. I can't live with these ghosts." The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The church stood alone on the ridge, its paint long faded, its steeple leaning like it was tired of praying for people who no longer believed. Inside, the smell of smoke and wax clung to the air. A few pews were broken. The hymnals were gone. Only one man remained, the preacher who had stopped preaching. Matthew Crane sat at the altar, his Bible open but unread. His lips moved in a whisper, not words, just guilt. The candlelight flickered across his trembling hands, and when the door creaked open, he didn't even flinch. He knew who it was. Abigail Holt, he said quietly. I wondered when you'd come. She stepped inside, boots echoing on the wood. Her cloak dripped with rain, her face hidden by the shadow of her hood. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moaned through the cracks in the walls. You remember my name, she said. I remember every name I've buried in this book, he answered, tapping the Bible. And yours has haunted me most. She came closer, the rifle glinting in the candlelight. You helped them hang my father. I didn't stop them, he said. And that's worse. Then you know why I'm here. Crane stood, the firelight dancing on his face. There was no fear in his eyes, only exhaustion. I've seen what you've done, he said. Crow, thorn, boon. The valley whispers your name like it's both curse and prayer. Tell me something, girl. Does it feel better now? Abigail hesitated. The question hit harder than any bullet. She had expected begging, excuses, lies, not this. It's justice, she said finally. The kind this land never gave us. Crane gave a bitter laugh. Justice? You think the Lord cares for justice bought with blood? She stepped closer, jaw tight. The Lord wasn't there when they tied that rope. No, he said softly. But you were, and now you're becoming the same thing that killed him. The words struck like cold wind. For the first time in years, Abigail's hands trembled. The rifle felt heavier than it ever had. She thought of her father's voice, calm, patient, kind. He told her once, "Don't let the world turn you, mean Abby. It ain't worth your soul." But that was before the tree, before the rope, before she'd learned that mercy had no place in the mountains. I didn't come here for a sermon, she said. Crane nodded slowly. Then come for peace. If you kill me, do it quick. I've already hung myself 100 times in my mind. He stepped toward her, unarmed, hands open. His eyes were wet, his voice steady. Do it, he whispered. End it. If that's what it takes to free you from this curse. Abigail raised the rifle. Abigail raised the rifle. Raised the rifle. Her finger found the trigger. And for a long time, she stood there, staring down the barrel at the man who had watched her father die. But the shot never came. Instead, she lowered the gun. Her breath came out shaky. You don't get to die easy, she said. You'll live with it. Every day. Until you see that tree in your sleep and feel the rope closing around your neck. Crane looked at her, not in relief, but in sorrow. You think sparing me makes you merciful, he said. But it just means your revenge ain't done. It'll never be done. It'll eat you until you're nothing. She turned away, stepping into the rain. Before she left, she said quietly, then I guess I'll let it. As she disappeared into the storm, Crane fell to his knees. For a long time, he wept, not for himself, but for her. Then he looked at the cross above the altar and whispered, Lord, forfeit, because I can't. The next morning, the townsfolk found him hanging from the church beam, a Bible clutched in his hand. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, just a rope and a note carved into the floorboards with a knife, MC. Now, if you're watching this part of the story, take a moment to breathe, because vengeance always feels right until it doesn't. Tell me in the comments, if you were Abigail Holt, would you have pulled the trigger or walked away like she did? And if you're still here, subscribe, because the final name on her list will bring everything full circle. The last man, Jonas Vexler, the one who lit the torch, the one who ordered it all, is still out there. And Abigail Holt is going back to where it all began, the hanging tree. The rain never stopped that week. It turned the dirt paths into rivers of mud, the creeks into torrents. And in the middle of it all, a girl rode through the valley on a stolen horse, her face set like stone. Abigail was thinner now, weaker from blood loss and hunger, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. She had one name left, and she wasn't going to die before crossing it out. Jonas Wexler. He was the richest of them all, a land baron turned magistrate, using the law as his weapon. He had men, money, and soldiers guarding him now. But Abigail didn't need luck. She had purpose, and she had the mountains on her side. Wexler's estate sat high above the valley, a fortress of greed and arrogance. Torchlight gleamed off polished railings, and dogs barked at the gates. Abigail dismounted far down the trail, tied her horse to a tree, and checked her rifle. It had 2 bullets left. She hoped it was enough. She crept through the underbrush, each step silent, every sense sharp. She could see the windows now, gold light spilling through, the silhouette of the man inside. Jonas Wexler. Old, gray, and safe. Or so he thought. But before she reached the fence line, a voice called out from behind her. "Drop the gun!" She froze. A man stepped from the shadows, one of Wexler's guards, pistol raised. He was younger than her, maybe 20, face rough with rain and fear. "I said drop it," he warned. "You're the whole girl, ain't you? They said you'd come." Abigail didn't move. Then slowly she turned to face him, eyes steady, calm. "Do you know what they did?" she asked. The guard hesitated. "Ain't my concern. I just do my job." "Then do it," she said quietly. He swallowed, hands shaking. "Don't make me," but before he could finish, lightning flashed. The shot echoed. He dropped to the ground, gun falling from his hand. Abigail had fired. He had missed. Fear had done the rest. She stepped over him and kept walking. One bullet left. One name left. One promise left to keep. Abigail dismounted silently, her boots sinking into the wet earth. She tied the horse to a post by the fence, whispering to it, "Stay still, girl. This'll be the last one." Her fingers brushed against the rope coiled at her hip, the same rope her father had once used to haul timber before they took it from him, before they took everything. Inside the manor, Jonas Wexler sat alone at his desk, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass. He'd aged since those days at the gallows, his hair thinner, his waist thicker, but the cruelty in his eyes was untouched. The fire behind him cast long shadows on the wall, and above his mantel hung a framed deed. The one that once bore Samuel Holt's name now struck through in red ink. He leaned back in his chair, reading a newspaper from Charleston, when the door creaked open. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then came the sound of boots, slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. "Who's there?" he barked, setting the paper down. No answer. He reached for the pistol on his desk. "You best show yourself before I—" Then she stepped into the light. Her coat was soaked, her eyes hard as flint. The flicker of the fire caught her cheek, glinting against the scar that cut across her jaw, the mark of her survival. "Hello, Mr. Wexler," Abigail said quietly. He froze. His hand still hovered over the pistol, but something about her voice, low, steady, too calm, stopped him. "Do I know you?" he muttered, though he already sensed it. "You did once," she said. "When you killed my father." "Samuel Holt," he murmured. "That name again." Wexler laughed once, nervously. "That was a long time ago, girl. Men were hanged for far less in those days." Abigail took a step forward, pulling the rope from her belt. "4 of your friends said the same thing before they met this rope." Wexler's laughter died. His fingers twitched toward the gun, but the crack of thunder masked the click of Abigail's revolver. "Try it," she said coldly, "and I'll make it quick." Wexler's mouth went dry. You killed them?" "One by one," Abigail replied. "Under the same tree they used to hang my father. The same tree where they left me screaming while the crows fed." She tossed the rope onto his desk. It landed with a thud. Wexler flinched. Abigail walked to the window. Through the glass, the old oak could be seen in the distance, its twisted silhouette still reaching toward the sky like a claw. "I kept their initials," she said softly. "Cut into the bark. C for crow, T for thorn, B for boon, C for crane." Then she turned back to him. "One left. V for Wexler." He lunged for the gun. But Abigail was faster. The shot rang through the manor, a thunderous crack that split the silence and shattered the bottle behind him. Glass exploded. Wexler stumbled back, clutching his arm. "You'll die for this," he howled. "No," she said. "You'll hang for it." She forced him outside, dragging him by the collar through the mud. The rain poured harder now, the sky roaring like it knew what was coming. Wexler fought, cursed, begged, but Abigail didn't hear him. Her mind was far away, on that day in 1803 when her father's boots swung above her head and her mother's scream broke the world apart. The tree stood before them, dark and massive. Its limbs twisted and cracked under the storm's weight, but still it stood, like it had waited 6 long years for this very night. Long years for this very night. On that day had waited 6 long years for this very night. Abigail looped the rope over the lowest branch. Her hands didn't shake this time. Wexler fell to his knees. "Please, please, I'll give you land, money, anything you want." Abigail leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only want what you took." She slipped the noose around his neck. He trembled, sobbing now, the rain streaming down his face. Abigail looked into his eyes and saw no remorse, just fear. "This tree remembers," she said. "Every creak of the rope, every gasp, every drop of blood." She tightened the knot. Wexler screamed, "Please, I was just following orders. It was the council, not me." Abigail stepped back. "You signed the paper. You watched him swing. You laughed." Then she kicked the stool from under him. The sound was awful. The crack of rope, the thrash of legs. Then silence. Only the rain. Only the tree. For a long time, Abigail just stood there, watching the body twist in the wind. When it finally stopped moving, she drew her knife and carved the last mark into the bark, JV. Her hand trembled when it was done. 5 letters now scarred the tree, one for each of the men who had stolen her life. She sank to her knees in the mud, crying not from relief, but from the hollow ache of finality. At dawn, she rode away. No one followed. No one dared. Some said she vanished into the Smoky Mountains. Others whispered she crossed west to Missouri. But the old folks of that valley, they still tell her story when the wind moves through the trees. They say if you pass that oak on a stormy night, you'll hear the creak of rope and see 5 shadows swaying in the lightning. And if you listen closely, a woman's voice whispering, "Justice for Samuel Holt." So tell me, what would you have done if you were her? Would you have let them live, or would you have made the rope sing one more time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new here, subscribe to Slave Rebellions for more forgotten tales of rebellion and revenge that history tried to bury. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more tales like this.